Hey everyone, welcome back. Today, we're clearing up some of the most common geography myths that people still believe. You'd be surprised how many misconceptions are floating around about countries, capitals, and even entire continents. So, let's set the record straight. 1. Holland and the Netherlands are the same thing. Let's start with one that confuses a lot of people. Many assume Holland and the Netherlands mean the exact same thing, but they don't. But it's wrong. The Netherlands is the actual country, made up of 12 provinces. Holland, on the other hand, refers only to two provinces, North Holland and South Holland. Yes, those are real places, and yes, they're just a part of the country, not the whole thing. So why the mix-up? Well, historically, North and South Holland were the most economically dominant regions, and because they played a major role in trade, people outside the Netherlands started using Holland to refer to the entire country. But if you call the whole country Holland today, you're technically leaving out 10 other provinces. 2. Toronto is the capital of Canada. Alright, let's talk about Canada. A lot of people assume Toronto is the capital just because it's the biggest and most famous city. But the actual capital of Canada is Ottawa. Yep, Ottawa. Not Toronto, not Vancouver, and not even Montreal. It's a smaller city, but it was chosen as the capital in 1857 by Queen Victoria because it was located between English-speaking Ontario and French-speaking Quebec, making it a neutral choice. Toronto may have the CN Tower, the business hubs, and a lot of international recognition, but when it comes to government, Ottawa is where it's at. 3. Iran is always hot. When people think of Iran, they often picture vast deserts and scorching heat. But that's not the full story. Iran actually experiences cold winters, and some areas even get heavy snowfall. Yes, parts of Iran do have desert climates, but the country is geographically diverse. There are mountains, valleys, and coastal regions. The Alborz and Zagros mountain ranges get super cold in winter, and temperatures can drop below freezing. There's even a ski resort just outside Tehran. So no, Iran isn't just a boiling hot desert, it's got seasons just like most places. 4. Rio de Janeiro is the capital of Brazil. I get it, Rio de Janeiro is one of the most famous cities in the world. It's home to Carnival, Christ the Redeemer, and some of the most beautiful beaches on the planet. But the actual capital of Brazil is Brasilia. Rio was actually the capital until 1960, but Brazil wanted a more centrally located capital to help develop the interior of the country. So they built Brasilia from scratch in the late 1950s, and today, that's where Brazil's government is based. Don't get me wrong, Rio is still a cultural hub, but if you ever need to name Brazil's capital on a quiz, Brasilia is the right answer. 5. Texas is the largest U.S. state. Alright, Texans love to brag about how everything is bigger in Texas, and to be fair, Texas is massive. But there's actually one U.S. state that's even bigger. Alaska is the largest state in the U.S., and it's not even close. Texas covers about 678,000 square kilometers, but Alaska, over 1.7 million square kilometers. That's more than twice the size of Texas. In fact, if Alaska were its own country, it would be in the top 20 largest countries in the world, so while Texas is big, it's definitely not the biggest. 6. Johannesburg is the capital of South Africa. South Africa is unique because most countries have one capital, but South Africa decided that wasn't enough. South Africa actually has 3 capitals: Pretoria, administrative capital, where the government offices are; Cape Town, legislative capital, where parliament meets; Bloemfontein, judicial capital, where the Supreme Court is. So why 3 capitals? Well, South Africa wanted to spread out government power instead of centralizing it in one place. Johannesburg is the country's biggest city and its economic hub, but it's not one of the capitals. 7. Sydney is the capital of Australia. Sydney is probably the most famous city in Australia. It's got the Sydney Opera House, the Harbour Bridge, Bondi Beach, and it's the country's biggest city. Naturally, people assume it's the capital. The actual capital of Australia is Canberra. So why Canberra? Well, back in the early 1900s, there was a rivalry between Sydney and Melbourne, both wanting to be the capital. Instead of choosing one, the government decided to build a whole new city in between them. That city became Canberra, and in 1913, it officially became the capital. Fun fact, because Canberra was designed as a capital city, it has some of the most planned out roads in the world, but barely any traffic lights. 8. The Pyramids of Giza are in the middle of the desert. Whenever you see pictures of the Great Pyramids, it looks like they're sitting in the middle of an endless, empty desert, far away from any civilization. But that's a little misleading. While they are technically in the desert, they're actually right next to Cairo, one of the largest cities in Africa. In fact, they're so close to the urban area that you can walk from some parts of the city to the pyramids in just a few minutes. They're literally on the edge of the city, and if you turn the camera around from the typical postcard view, you'll see roads, buildings, hotels, and even a Pizza Hut and KFC nearby. That's right, you can actually sit down, eat a slice of pizza, and stare directly at one of the greatest wonders of the ancient world. It's not the remote, untouched location people imagine, and modern infrastructure surrounds the area much more than you'd think. 9. Istanbul is the capital of Turkey. This one confuses a lot of people, and I get it. Istanbul is by far the biggest and most famous city in Turkey. It has a rich history spanning thousands of years, and it's literally the bridge between Europe and Asia. But is it the capital? No, friends. Ankara is the actual capital of Turkey. So why isn't Istanbul the capital? Well, it used to be back when it was called Constantinople under the Ottoman Empire, but when Turkey became a republic in 1923, its first president, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, decided to move the capital to Ankara. The idea was to have a more centralized capital instead of one that was right on the coast. Plus, they wanted a fresh start after the fall of the Ottoman Empire. Istanbul is still Turkey's cultural, financial, and tourism hub, but when it comes to the government, Ankara is where the action happens. 10. Norway doesn't have one of the world's longest coastlines. If I asked you which country has the second longest coastline in the world, you'd probably guess Russia, the US, or maybe Australia, right? Makes sense because those are all huge countries. But let's clear this misconception. Norway actually has the second longest coastline in the world. Yep, right after Canada, Norway takes the number 2 spot. And the reason is fjords. Norway's coastline isn't just a straight line. It's full of twists, turns, and thousands of islands that stretch the total coastline to over 58,000 kilometers, 36,000 miles. That's more than the US and Russia or China. So while Norway might not look huge on a map, its coastline is one of the most complex and longest in the world. 11. Java is just a small island. When people think of densely populated places, they usually imagine cities like Tokyo, New York, or London. But what if I told you the most populated island in the world is one you probably don't think about much? Java is the most populated island on the planet, with around 150 million people. That's right, one single island has nearly twice as many people as the entire UK. Java is part of Indonesia, and it's home to the country's capital, Jakarta, along with multiple other major cities. It's about the size of Alabama or Greece, yet it has more people than Russia. Let that sink in. It's a great example of how size doesn't always equal population. 12th. Great Britain is the most populated island in the world. Now that we just talked about Java, let's clear up another island population myth. Many people assume that if an island is part of a powerful, well-known country, it must be the most populated. Great Britain, being home to the United Kingdom and one of the most influential places in world history, often gets mistaken for the most populated island on Earth. But in reality, it's not even in the top 2. Great Britain is actually the 3rd most populated island in the world. The top 3 are Java, Indonesia, 150 million people; Honshu, Japan, 104 million people; Great Britain, UK, 66 million people. So, while Great Britain has played a huge role in shaping the modern world through its history, politics, and culture, it's far from being the most crowded island. In fact, compared to Java, it has less than half the population. This just goes to show that size and global influence don't always mean high population density, and some of the world's busiest islands aren't necessarily the ones people expect. 13. Suriname's official language is Spanish or Portuguese. Since Suriname is in South America, most people assume it speaks either Spanish, like most of the continent, or Portuguese, like Brazil. But actually, neither is true. The official language of Suriname is Dutch, which often surprises people because it seems out of place in a region dominated by Romance languages. Suriname was a Dutch colony for a long time, from the 1600s until it gained independence in 1975. During this time, Dutch became the language of administration, education, and government. And even after independence, it remained the official language. Today, Dutch is still widely spoken in schools, businesses, and the media, making Suriname one of the only Dutch-speaking countries outside Europe. 14. English is the second most spoken native language in the world. English is everywhere. It's the most commonly learned second language and dominates business, entertainment, and the internet. But does that mean it's the second most spoken native language? Nope. Spanish is actually the second most spoken native language in the world, after Mandarin Chinese. Here's how it breaks down. 1. Mandarin Chinese. Over 900 million native speakers. 2. Spanish. Nearly 500 million native speakers. 3. English. About 370 million native speakers. Even though English has a global presence, more people are born speaking Spanish than English. So, while English is often considered the world's most important language for international communication, Spanish actually beats it in native speakers. 15. Afghanistan is part of the Middle East. When you hear about Afghanistan in the news, it's often mentioned in the same breath as Middle Eastern countries. But geographically speaking, it's not actually part of the Middle East. Afghanistan is geographically closer to South Asia than the Middle East. In fact, Afghanistan is closer to Mumbai than it is to Iraq or Yemen. It borders Pakistan, and many of its cultural and linguistic ties are with South Asia. Yes, Afghanistan has some Middle Eastern influences, but when it comes to geography, it's part of Central and South Asia, not the Middle East. Some of these were pretty surprising, right? Who knew Norway had one of the world's longest coastlines, or that Java is the most populated island on Earth? And if you're new here, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss out on more fun geography content. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.